Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Isquist Alon. And my name is Alon. I'm an assistant professor of teaching. Some of you already know me, and some just met me now. It's a great honor and privilege to be here with you today, launching what I hope would be a recurring theme for years to come. We are meeting today on Singh, unceded territory, and what does that mean for me is the whole idea of entrepreneurship, innovation, happens all the time, has happened over history. One of the things that I learned is how innovative Singh people were over history, adapting to, again, the whole Okanagan Valley when people first moved here 11,000 years ago. If you haven't had a chance to go to the Heritage Museum in West Bank, Kelowna, there's a West Bank Heritage Museum for the Singh Okanagan people, and you can see artifacts and examples of technologies that were created and adapted for salmon fishing, for living here in the Okanagan climate. Very innovative, very adaptive, and very impressive, and makes you think about how people were able to adapt and innovate and succeed and flourish in times before electricity, before the internet, and pass this knowledge from generation to generation, and they're still passing it on today. The purpose of the Germinator, I guess, meetup is to make it very informal. It's not a lecture. It's not a course. You don't get credit. You don't get brownie points, but you do get to hear fantastic stories. And I'm super excited to have Jay with us as our first speaker, guest speaker for this year. And hopefully you get to meet more and more people as they come back on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis, just to kind of think out loud, what does innovation look like? What does technology commercialization look like, or what can it look like? And what does entrepreneurship look like or feel like? There is no one answer. And hopefully what will come out from all the people I asked to step in virtually or in person is you can see how diverse these experiences are, and how surprising people's experiences are. And I think I used to think about entrepreneurship as very linear, as well as education and career profession. I don't anymore. I lost that path a long time ago. There's nothing linear. It's all very random and very coincidental. And so embracing that is really the path to success. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Jay. I shared his bio on the website. Again, my website is ewil.ok.ubc.ca. If you accidentally get it autocorrect from ewil to evil, it will still go to the same place, because I made sure the URL is also directing you to the right place. I asked Jay to share some of his experiences starting up and running Able Innovation, and hopefully you can see a demo of what the product of the company looks like. And I'll stop rambling here. So Jay, I'll leave the floor to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Alon. I really appreciate the honor and the introduction, and I feel pretty passionately about what you're trying to do, which is gain exposure or provide exposure to students who may be considering entrepreneurship or working in and around startups. I think you've seen me or seen my company about 4 years ago when we were just starting up. So any comments, would be welcome from your end too. But a little bit about me, I'll just share a quick slide deck too, because I like to think of things as stories and my random paths that kind of led me to where I am today. A little bit about myself is I'm an engineer by training, and my passion has always been to utilize technology for good. So when I graduated, I joined a solar energy startup called Morgan Solar, I actually had an existential crisis because I had an offer from an oil and gas company, a big company in Fort Mac, or join a startup that was paying me literally a half. I chose the startup because I wanted to learn. And then I really, appreciated the learning opportunities within that company, and that set me down a path of wanting to do something on my own. Now, just backing up a little bit about myself personally, I say I have 3 kids. I recently welcomed my newborn daughter a month ago, Jocelyn, and then the 3rd kid is the product, which is Able Innovation. And as well, I'd like to attribute a lot of everything that I'm doing with my co-founder, Philip. We've worked together since 2010 in varying capacities. When I joined Morgan Solar, Philip was a very senior employee there, and ever since then, we've launched other ventures together. We've helped other startups together, and then we also launched Able Innovations together. So just to get a bit into feel free to pause me or let me know where to focus on, but I'll just take a story through kind of the professional journey and what chronologically led me to where I am today, if that makes sense. And I'm happy to kind of pause anywhere and answer any questions, if that works.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Yeah, so a little bit, where things got started was I started my career at Morgan Solar. We're developing dual axis robotic trackers. So these are robots that you put the solar panel on and they follow the sun in 2 degrees of freedom. I started off as a hardcore design engineer, really interested in the technology and the promise of the technology, which was, this is going to revolutionize solar and it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar company. And I gave it my all for 8 years. So started off on the design side. Then I spent 5 years, 6 months every year in China, figuring out what it takes to manufacture this thing at massive scale. And the amount of effort really it takes to take a prototype to something that can be made hundreds of thousands of the time. And that was immense. Like one would think it would take 6 months to get there. It was 5 years later and spending half a year every year. And then only could we begin to think of scaling up. So that was something I learned. And at the same time, I also learned that, as time went on, I started to ask questions about why isn't the company as big as it should be? And I learned a lot about, it's really important to have a good technology, but also really good product market fit, which is, are you really solving the problem the right way? And in our case, in the solar industry, the industry is changing really quickly. So we weren't meeting the need of the day. We were solving a need that was maybe a couple of years behind every time. So at that moment, around 2018, I started getting a bit restless. And myself and my co-founder Phil, during the evening, started helping other startups because we knew we wanted to work in and with startups, but we didn't necessarily have the capital resources to launch our own company. So we started helping companies that had a product, mission we believed in, and started helping them launching their products because that's where we specialized in, which is scaling up technologies. So we helped, close to a dozen companies actually launch their products, and it was like our own mini thesis in understanding how companies can be scaled, how companies are run, how companies are funded. And I learned a lot from there and gained confidence in, wanting to launch my own company, which was Able Innovation. And at this point, I'll rewind a bit, to why I started Able and why I'm solving the problem that I am. So from a pretty young age, I had the privilege of spending a lot of time in long-term care centers. Just by luck, my mom started working in that industry, and I used to volunteer there a lot. And I developed a really strong connection to a lot of the residents that stayed there. And one thing I realized was this is a forgotten portion of our society, where there are so many people behind closed doors that are, in these long-term care centers, that there is no innovation. Nobody's thinking about innovation for the elderly at all. And one problem that stuck with me at a very early age was a lot of these people were in long-term care, not necessarily because they were extremely sick, it's because they couldn't get out of bed, like as simple as that. One of somebody would fall in a shower, break their hips, and then they needed assistive care for the rest of their life. They would never spend another day at home. And that didn't sit too well with me. So I've been thinking of ways and answers to how people can stay at home longer in a setting that they choose to. I joined charities where I was delivering food because I thought at one point that, cooking food is a big problem for older adults. Maybe we can deliver food to them 2-3 times a week, and that might allow them to stay at home longer. But in asking these questions for literally 10-15 years, it clicked to me sometime in 2015-16 that this is a problem that needs to be solved through automation. So moving people in and out of bed is a highly repetitive task that is highly labor intensive, and the resources to move people are decreasing, and more people are getting older. So that's really what led me to the synthesis of starting Able Innovations, where the key goal is to develop technologies and robotics that can transfer people in all types of settings, with the end goal of allowing them to stay at home longer. A little bit, about the origin story too. Able Innovations was incorporated in a Starbucks, and the ideation happened over a faux meals with Phil. Every lunch we'd go and discuss how we want to launch the product. And this is an old show, some of you may or may not know it. It's called The Wire, and a lot of our business lessons came from there. Where we are as a company right now is, we're getting a lot of great interest from hospitals. This is a picture from the US Veterans Health Administration, where literally 150 people showed up to look at the demos of our devices, because there's nothing like what we're doing in the field. And just to give you a quick visual, we've been centered around developing technology that is intuitive for nurses, and at the push of a button, our vision is that a single nurse should be able to transfer a person from a bed to the stretcher. In the future, we're going to iterate on this and transfer people between beds to wheelchairs. We'll focus on turning patients, transferring bariatric patients. So there's a lot of modalities, but this is kind of step one. And what we're hearing from the market is this in and of itself is transformative enough to help. And what's happened since and during COVID is, because there's a big shortage of nurses, hospitals are very, very receptive to what we're doing, because it allows a single nurse to do something that requires multiple nurses, back-breaking effort to do this. And with kind of that introduction, I'd be happy to discuss anything more or less, and open to any questions.
Anybody has any question you want to ask so far from Jay? Yeah, Ken?
What stage Able's at right now? So like employees, and how hard is it to get those first few employees?
Are you able to pick it up, Jay? Can you hear the mic?
I heard a bit about what stage we are, but I couldn't hear anything else after that.
How many people?
Yeah, and how hard was it to recruit the first few employees?
Yeah, that's a very interesting little story there. So right now we're about 20 people, and the first employees we hired was around late 2018, early 2019. And it was really, really difficult to hire first few employees, because a lot of it is, you're bringing on somebody that you are trusting with your ideas, not just an employee at that stage. The first few employees really need to be somebody you trust. And it's also an issue of where do you get the capital to fund employees? Because in my case, I needed a lot of capital to develop a product and to start selling. I was quite fortunate. What I did was, first of all, I quit my full-time job because I was trying to develop Able Innovations in parallel with kind of working full-time, because I just got married. But at the end of it, I just ended up quitting. And the first 6 months, I was just knocking on people's doors for any opportunities from funding. I realized very quickly that investors won't back this at this early stage, because it's just an idea. So I went to government grants, And in my case, I was introduced to somebody from this organization called NRC IRAP, and they fund research and development. And it was, I think, December 21st or 22nd. And I've been talking to this individual for about 4 or 5 months about my business plan, what I wanted to do. And he calls me up and says, Jay, I have $50,000 left over in my budget, and I need a proposal on my desk tomorrow. If you can get something that's of quality, there's a high chance you have it. So I had to put a 20-page proposal with financials, everything, literally overnight, present it to them. And that's kind of what funded my first 2 employees. And then kind of started to snowball from there. Another thing I did was, soon after Philip, my co-founder, joined me, we also used resources from our consulting business to then supplement a lot of the grant capital. So before we raised any investor money, we had about 8 to 10 people through government grants and kind of capital coming in from the consulting side. And one thing just to mention about the stage is we're just approaching the stage now where hospitals are starting to buy our technology. So we've had a few clinical demonstrations in hospitals, and it's quite an eventful time where the biggest health system in the US, which is the USVA, is looking at us quite closely. And we have we've won our first public bid just today, actually. So there's a lot of great traction happening in and around our company.
So just gonna recap, you've been thinking about this problem for 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
You started working on this back in 2016 while working full-time. And you basically had to quit your job 2 years later.
Yeah, I knew the problem I wanted to solve. I felt a strong pull towards developing technology for older adults, ever since I was a teenager. That's kind of what I felt like I wanted to do, but I didn't know what. And then around 2016, I can even play the video I made, and I just literally showed this to people I knew in long-term care for a couple of years to get the head around what I want to do. So I made this very crude animation of a conveyor belt that will essentially move people from a stretcher onto a chair. And it was super duper crude, but the more I talked to people, the more they encouraged me to kind of pursue this a bit more. And what the key moment that drove me to quit my job was I'd just gotten married, and my wife basically gave me a deadline. She was like, you can't keep on talking about this venture you want to launch forever. Your time to launch is coming to an end. So either do it now and go all in, or don't. So that's really what caused me to do it. It was at a point in my life where I actually had the most responsibility I ever had. We just bought a house, and it was quite scary to quit your job when you just bought a house. But yeah. And this was, for the record, the first prototype we ever made, which was me transferring a doll on a pillow, because it's not trivial to understand how we can transfer somebody with the proposed method that we did. Nobody had ever done it before. So this was in 2018 alone, just for your reference. And from that point on to now, you can clearly see kind of the technical iterations we've come through to get to where we are today.
Thanks. Yeah, and I guess part of why I kind of was trying to recap the chronology of how you got to where you are is I think there's a misconception about the aha moment. People wake up one day and the light bulb goes on, and then they go out and get money and they start a company. And we've worked together with the internship program when I was at U of T, and working with hundreds of students, I was constantly amazed how students were surprised that entrepreneurs start moonlighting entrepreneurs as moonlighting while working full-time. And people don't appreciate that. And I think that's something that we don't talk enough about when people think, well, what are you gonna do next year? How will you pay your bills?
Yeah, there's a real practical side of things of life that I had to address. When I graduated, I was so tempted to want to do something myself. I had a friend, and we used to list ideas in engineering of what we want to do. All the way from like really cool Xbox controllers to like life-changing things, and we kind of knew we wanted to do this, but nothing was as overwhelming as, once you really find a problem to solve, it just self-propels itself.
Anybody have any more questions? No? You good?
I'm curious, at what point, like on the practical side, quitting a job, having, a family, having kids, like, how did you find are you naturally predisposed to risk taking? Is that, or would you consider yourself risk averse? Like, it takes a certain personality to choose to leave a safe job for something more uncertain.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I would say I've always been slightly risk aligned, but as an engineer, I'm also quite, I try to be methodical and conservative. It was definitely the biggest leap of faith I've taken ever. And in the spectrum of entrepreneurs, if I can like paint it that way, most of them are very, very prone to taking pretty big risks. And I'm nowhere near the, riskiest of entrepreneurs. But it was really about gaining confidence in my ability to do this, and doing everything in my power to be ready for it, I'd say. So, I consider kind of like almost like training. I worked 8 years in a startup, and I was always observing the CEOs, the CTOs, the management, and always telling myself things I may do differently. Then I helped startups and scaling up the product, but I also saw, from an outsider perspective, multiple startups, and some of them went on to Y Combinator and scaling up. Some of them went under, and seeing constant trends. And I almost think of it like I had 8 years worth of education before doing it myself. And I also saw a window of opportunity closing to do it myself. So that was kind of the only time I could do it. And I'd argue it was the best time to do it because I had a sense of urgency, because sometimes you may have, if you don't have a closing window, you might just loaf a bit on a startup. And, there's a lot of people I've met in accelerators or incubators that are just, finishing school. They don't really have a personal, like, extreme drive to achieve success. They're kind of there to live the startup life that's sometimes glorified, but they don't have that inherent drive to do something and the urgency to do it. And I feel like my window of opportunity closing kind of gave me that urgency to like go all in and try to do it.
Mentioned a closing window. Why did you feel your window was closing? Is it just simply because your wife's mandate, or was it?
No, like, it's I have kids now. At that point, I didn't. If I had kids to start while I was starting a company, people do it. Don't get me wrong. It was just going to be very difficult for me to do it, I feel. And my company's at a stage now where the risk is severely reduced than day one of me quitting a job and having just an animation, right? So it was within that. It was recognizing that once I have people and mouths to feed, I wouldn't be able to quit my job. But people still do it. Like, don't get me wrong, people can do it. I just wasn't going to take that risk and leave it to that. So I said I have 2 years to give this my all.
I have a different type of question. Following your amazing animation skills from before, one of the things that I've seen over the years, and I think moving to the School of Engineering made it even more obvious than before, is the impulse to spend money and build something to show other people, rather than doing the cost effective, just make a crude drawing or animation that you can do for free to actually get people's feedback. And again, the other side of it is beyond the spending money on a prototype that there's no proof you need to, is the idea that your first idea is wrong, either partially or completely, and you have to show it to people to get feedback to get it right. So I was curious if you can comment on, again, these two elements of not spending sooner than you have to, and the need to constantly learn and iterate your idea to get it right before diving deep and spending the money.
Yeah, like I'll share a bit of a story on like a chip on my shoulder, which was, when I worked at the first company I put my blood, sweat, and tears into it. I was fully committed into that startup and the mission. As I peeled back the layers, I recognized like at one point we had the most efficient solar cell in the world, but we couldn't sell. What I realized was we weren't interacting with the market enough, and we were developing the coolest technology as engineers. Like, the company was was essentially like a sandbox where there would be a new idea that would come up and the company would fund a new idea. But all of this was done almost in absentia of market research. And that's kind of the boring part, but the most important thing, because at the end of the day, you're developing a product to sell. So that's a lesson I learned. And while my predisposition is to go tinkering and engineering, I actually purposely spent 6 months not doing that at all. And I started using alternative means to understand what I need to be doing. Even my first idea was bed to wheelchair, but ultimately we're doing bed to bed transfers. Like even there, I had the opportunity to present my idea to a few doctors in a hospital. And they kind of said, hey, this would be great in our MRI suite because we're transferring unconscious individuals all the time. So I made an animation of that. And they said, you know what, we would pay for this. And that's kind of the type of iteration I went through. And then I made a half-scale hardware device. I took that into hospitals. And the reason I made it half-scale was, what is the most capital efficient way I can get market feedback? So the key motivation before investing a lot is to calibrate yourself to get as much market feedback so that you have enough data around what you want to build before you pull the trigger essentially and invest a lot of capital and raise a lot of capital. Because especially in my industry, which is hardware, you don't get a lot of tries at it. In software, you can change your app, you can modify it, you can have over there updates. But in my case, you make a prototype, each prototype is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. You get that wrong, you only have so many tries at it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Can you speak a bit about going into healthcare? That in itself is a can of worms with regulation, approvals, especially if you go to US versus Canada, right? I mean, CDC versus Canada CDC.
Yeah, it was, what I really thought, I was looking at industries that hadn't been disrupted in a while. And a lot of times, healthcare and hardware have a very scary sheen to them, justifiably so. But I kept on asking myself kind of why not? Like, why isn't there technology that can do this? People are going to age at an unprecedented rate where, the number of people over 65 is going to double, but the number of facilities aren't going to double and the number of nurses aren't going to double. So something has to give. And nobody gave me a convincing enough answer that addressed these concerns. And I was fully convinced kind of in the 2018 timeframe that, something has to change because the system is going to break. There won't be enough nurses to take care of people. And that was my 5 to 7 year hypothesis, but we're seeing that play out right now with COVID. Because there's such a spike in demand of our healthcare system, it burned people out. And this is going to continue because our society is aging at an unprecedented rate, and the aging population is a really good proxy to the demand of healthcare systems. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, a bit, and I realized I said CDC, I meant FDA.
Yeah,
I guess
okay.
I was thinking from a regulatory process, like actual nuts and bolts of, because as soon as you have to go through regulatory approval, it adds what, another 3 to 5 years to the get to market deadline?
You'd be surprised. So like that's the cool thing. One of the projects I did, like one of the consulting jobs I did was at this exoskeleton company. And I got to understand how they approach their regulation and kind of things you do and don't do to navigate it so that it's not as daunting as that. Obviously, it's a very big risk in healthcare, but in our case, what we did was we weaved a path that allowed us to get approved within a matter of months instead of years. So we are registered on the FDA and Health Canada already, and we didn't have to put a lot of capital into it. But it was really about understanding the details and having a coherent plan. But it was definitely very, very scary. Like every investor we approached, 3/4 of them wouldn't even talk to us because of that specific concern. But as long as we had a path early on to show, we have a realistic plan here. We're not going to spend 3 years doing this. We can get this in 6 months. Please take a bet on us. And that's kind of what we ended up doing. And it's also worth noting, like I had no healthcare experience before this, but I did go out and find the right advisors and spoke to the other entrepreneurs that had crossed this bridge before, and I felt like did it in a pretty effective way, and I kind of mirrored that.
So I guess that kind of leads me to a perfect next question, which is how important it is to find the right mentors and champions, I guess.
I mean, it's definitely important to sometimes affirm your beliefs or kind of keep you in check, because you have ultimately a lot of responsibility and a lot of decision-making power. In my case, I found the right investors, I feel, initially that also became advisors. So like our earliest investors, like the first investor I met, he had a personal affinity to the problem that we're solving. He had unfortunately, lost his father to bed sores. And this is an individual who's very, very wealthy, has everything at his disposal, but at the end of the day, his father got something by staying in the bed too long, and it got infected and he passed away. So it was his realization. And the first thing he told me was, Jay, I won't invest in this technology, but I really find it cool. But over 6 to 8 months, he continued to provide his advice and then ultimately became an investor. In a similar manner, one of the chiefs of ER at a well-known hospital here, I struck up a similar relationship. So I didn't go out and seek like advice or advisors. These were just key people that I genuinely wanted feedback from, and they ended up being a really critical part of my journey. So you always have to keep your ears open, but I wouldn't, I guess, quantify it as you need specifically an advisor or a mentor, because to this date, like I don't have a specific mentor. I know certain people that know a lot about certain things, and I go to them for advice on those specific things, I suppose.
Whether they have an official title of mentor or not.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'd say, I guess I have like area specific mentors.
Yeah.
I'm mindful of the time. We're getting close to the hour. I don't know if anybody wants to add any thoughts. No.
sorry, where is Able Innovations based? In Toronto.
You're still in Toronto, yeah?
Yeah, we're still here.
Do you think it's easier to grow a company in a place in Toronto versus, let's say, Kelowna? Were there specific advantages in being in a large urban center?
I think, you know, we have access to a lot of really bright engineers. And, you know, I'll just tell you, like, we're looking at new office space at one point, and there's a temptation to move out of the center of the city. Like, we're still very centrally located, even for being a robotic hardware company. And that was intentional because we recognize that a lot of the best, you know, talent seem to prefer, you know, commuting by subway 10-15 minutes from downtown. So there are definitely certain advantages. Disadvantages are, you know, it's expensive. So when I started the company, I found office space out in Markham, actually, to keep the cost low. And then I migrated closer and closer to downtown, just to, you know, make sure that we have access to great talent. Also, there's a lot of supporting ecosystems in the city, but I'm, you know, at the same time, I'd say there's a lot of government initiatives and incentives to encourage innovation in areas like Kelowna, or areas that are not Toronto, essentially Toronto, Vancouver, because a lot of the economic growth is happening there. So there's actually substantial capital that's available to such places, and I'm almost jealous sometimes because there's a lot of grants that encourage growing businesses outside of these urban areas.
I'll just point out that Kelowna has a lot of elderly people, if you ever look for a second market. Oh, I think you froze. Did we lose the internet? Jay? Oh,
Yep, can you hear me?
yeah, you froze
Hello?
for a second. Oh, yeah, can you hear us?
Yeah, you just mentioned that Kelowna has a lot of senior people, and then I cut off. All right.
Yes, that was my pitch. If you're looking for a second office.
Yeah.
We have we have the best school of engineering in the world. And we have lots of old people.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely something that, you know, BC is actually quite innovative when it comes to in the sector of innovation for aging individuals, and definitely something I want to do more of and understand the geographies for sure. But I hope to visit the school one day and see you and all the students too.
Yeah, we would love to have you here. Especially if you bring a prototype for us to play with.
Yeah, we can make that happen. I mean, I've been doing, I joke, half jokingly, I've been doing road shows a lot, and there's definitely a lot of weight to, you know, when people actually get transferred and see this thing in action, you know, their reactions are usually really telling, and it's pretty awesome to see that. And then people finally get it, like, this is how it works and this is the technology. Videos is one medium, but in person is definitely a different medium.
So I'll just ask you one last question, and then I'll let you go. And I think there's another class waiting for us in this room after. If there's one thing that an engineering student, and I think we have graduate and undergraduate students in the room right now, and faculty. If there's one thing that somebody currently in school should think about, not necessarily do, but start thinking about going down the path of not just entrepreneurship, but commercialization.
Mm-hmm.
What should they be looking out for?
I think try to solve problems that, you know, nobody can answer. Nobody can, like in my case, it was, I kept on asking the question, you know, what's going to happen? Who's going to solve this problem? And nobody could answer that. And that's what led me down this path. So I would say first is, you know, don't just go for developing cool technology. Like, that's definitely a motivation, but try to solve real world problems that you feel haven't been addressed adequately, and ask a lot of questions of yourself, of everybody around you. If nobody can answer you, and the answer always comes down to kind of your proposed solution or your proposed venture, then go ahead and do it. But don't dive into the technology, too early or prematurely, because that's what I see. And I definitely had a predisposition to just thinking of a cool idea and then developing it without even spending, a proportional amount of time researching the market and seeing if this is really solving a problem for society.
Well, thank you, Jay. Thank you very much for taking an hour of your time to join us in BC. I know I've been following you for the last 4 years, I guess, since we crossed paths back at U of T, and I know that it's gonna look even more magnificent in 4 years from now. So thank you again for taking the time. I think you're frozen again. Now, the joy and the curse of internet communication.
Yeah, I'm coming back.
Oh, yeah. I was just gonna say.
I could hear you, but I think I just froze. Yeah.
Oh, okay, perfect. Well, thank you again for taking the time, and I, on behalf of myself and everybody in the room, truly appreciate your sharing your personal experience, and I hope we cross paths again virtually and in person sooner than later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also leave it at this. If anybody has any questions, I know it's a very confusing road to navigate if you're thinking of starting or if you're not thinking of starting and the way you want to take your career. It's something I spent a lot of time on. I'll leave the channels of communications open. Lon, feel free to share any information, but it's really great what you're doing, which is giving exposure to people who may have some disposition to developing new things. And I'd also say there's never been a better time to pursue entrepreneurship than right now. There's a lot of resources out there.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Stay safe, and until next time.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
And I'll just stop recording.